Hello, NarraScope, and welcome to my talk, Horror Games Lore versus Gameplay. So, I am Cam, or Ren. I go by they, he pronouns. I am a narrative designer and writer. I am currently working as a game designer at Shell Games here in Pittsburgh. Um, and I am also the lead programmer on the visual novel Validate. Uh, there's also a handful of other games, mainly horror, that I do in my own free time during like jams or just as personal projects. But that is majority of who I am. This is a recorded talk today. Unfortunately, I am feeling a little bit sick, so better safe than sorry. We're recording this rather than me coming in live, though I should be currently in the Discord, probably, watching this in the same channel as everyone else who's watching online. So if there are any questions, feel free to at me in there. I'll share my Discord tag and everything at the end. But yeah, very happy to do this talk. Before I get into anything, I want to go over some definitions. I'm going to be throwing around the words lore, story, narrative, gameplay, mechanics, all these words that I think I use a little differently than they usually are used. So first, what is lore? Lore I have defined as the breadcrumbed story that the player has to find in a game by, finding all the collectibles, the notes, the audio logs, what have you. And also, it can be the story that players can infer through dialogue or background/environmental elements that they can find in the game. However, lore is not just the actions you take to find this information, it's more about just the information itself that you can find. Conversely, gameplay is the game's mechanics, and how the player will interact with the game. So if a game has audio logs, for instance, lore is the information that you would find from those logs, whereas the gameplay would be the actions that you take to find those logs. Also, lore does not equal narrative by my definition. When we say narrative here, it will be more the story that is being told directly to the player. Whereas lore is the story that the player can find. And story here I will be using as an overall umbrella term for both words. If I ever slip up and say narrative instead of story, just note that I meant story. So, story is the overall thing. It is both the narrative and the lore combined. For example, in the game The Mortuary's Assistant, the narrative tells you, the player, that you are playing as a mortuary's assistant and that you will need to exorcise a demon in order to survive the night where you are. And this demon will exist in one of the bodies that you are cleaning up as a mortuary's assistant. However, the lore that you can find through playing this game is that the demon is really a metaphor for the player character's addiction. Another thing I would like to do is talk about how we can quantify lore in gameplay. Lore is a little easier, gameplay is a little harder, but how I quantify lore is by these two questions. Usually you can tell when a game is packed full of lore, but these will help us as we talk about some games later. So the first question is, does the game disperse lore in multiple ways? Remember that our definition of lore here is a story that the player can find. So does the game have multiple different ways for us to find that? In many AAA titles, they tend to use one way or another. So audio logs that you can find through BioShock, or the little collectibles that you can find in Alien Isolation. I wouldn't say either of those games are super lore heavy for having their one way to show off lore compared to a game like maybe Dishonored, if we stick with our AAA examples, that has the Empress's Heart that will tell you some things as you're going around the game, in addition to its tapes and collectibles. The next question is, how much more did you learn about the story after digging through its lore? when you finish a game, do you feel satisfied with the story, assuming you played it where you are able to remember everything that's happened and it hasn't been a very long time between playthroughs? Um, did you have to, go back to the game to dig through it a little more? Uh, if you didn't, did you immediately go into YouTube and type in game explained to find videos that will, just basically explain everything that you just played so far? How many of those videos did you watch to feel content after? So this last question is really just about, you know, how much did the narrative tell you versus how much lore did you have to find to actually know what was going on? So quantifying gameplay is a little harder, because it feels very strange to say like one game has more gameplay than another. But this is the way that I have come to think about it. So the first one is, how much can you do with the mechanics? So in BioShock, for example, you can get like an electric shocky power, and BioShock takes place underwater, so there's water everywhere, and you can shoot that electricity into the water to kill enemies. Or you also get a firepower, so if there's ever any oil or something flammable on the floor, you can shoot that to make that catch on fire, and then conversely also make the enemies catch on fire. I am pretty sure that BioShock tutorializes those uses, but I still think it counts because it is a different way to use the mechanics. Usually, if you're given a gun or something, like a power like that, you just use it to kill or take out an enemy in some way. So being able to use them with the environmental factors within a game, I think is very interesting. And the other way is, what is the core gameplay loop? Does this loop grow with the player? Is it repetitive? Like, for example, in Slender the 8 Pages, that game has a very tight core gameplay loop that is extremely repetitive. There's a bunch of different locations you can visit that are randomly generated in a map. You go to one of those areas, you look for a page. If it's there, you take it. If it's not, you move on to the next area. The only thing that really changes about the game is the locations of the places where you can find a page, and Slender's AI, he just kind of gets more aggressive the more pages you get, and I think also the longer the game goes on. And then the other part of that is, does the game change or grow? Are there skill trees where you can, approach the game in a different way in different playthroughs? Can you level up? Do the mechanics change slightly to complement the story? All those things, I think, will come to quantify our gameplay. It still feels very weird to say that a game has more gameplay than another, but using these, it's very clear that BioShock will have more gameplay than a game like Slender. Alright, so now I want to get to the main question of today. What is it about lore? Excuse me. I consume a lot of horror games, mostly indie, and we will mostly be talking about indie for the duration of the talk. I love AAA horror just as much as the next person, but those games tend to be more narrative focused than lore focused if they have like a main story at all. So within these indie horror games, excuse me, I muted myself to cough, but within these indie horror games, I have noticed a large uptick that have focused less on narrative and so much more on lore, and will use this lore as their main vessel of storytelling. Along with that, they tend to have less gameplay than other games, usually to facilitate this lore more. So one thing I really want to know is, what is it about lore that makes people, just love it so much? Is it a new thing? that I'm just noticing because I tend to consume these games. Is it an old thing that has like slowly been picking up steam over the years? So to answer this question, I want to look at some games. First off, these two games came out this year. This is DREDGE, which is a eldritch horror fishing game, and Garden of Banban, which is a, I guess, mascot horror, like a generic mascot horror game. Both these games blew up fairly quickly, and at least in Banban's case, that allowed the devs to make 2 more games, and they have a 4th on the way. The narrative in both of these is, more or less non-existent, using the definition that I am. If you played either of these games by only interacting with the narrative and not so much the lore, you'd probably get confused by the time you got to the end. DREDGE you might be able to understand a tiny bit more, especially if you're familiar with like generic eldritch horror stuffs. But yeah, still not really. You definitely have to go back and be like, okay, what the hell just happened? But gameplay-wise, DREDGE has a very tight fishing loop. Basically, you'll gain a quest to either like get a fish or pull something up from the sea. You'll go fishing to find that thing, and then you'll go back to the person who asked for it and give it back. You can also see in this screenshot that fishing is a little like almost rhythm-y game. Basically, you have to hit the button when it's in the green, and if you don't, then it takes longer to catch the fish. And then you can see the boat on the other side, which has like a little bit of a Tetris thing. So whenever you catch a fish, it takes up a certain amount of space. There's also some other stuff where you can upgrade your boat and stuff, but this is the main core loop of the game. And you could play the entire game without interacting with its upgrade system or anything like that. Banban, on the other hand, its gameplay is clunky at best and frustrating at worst. All you really do in the player in this first game is you have the drone, which you can control with a little controller. The way it controls is basically it draws a line from where it currently is to where you just pointed. It has no AI, it's not smart at all. So if it's like up against a wall and you tell it to go further up along the wall, there's a high chance it might just bump into the wall and not move the entire way. Only because it might be at like a weird angle or something. I don't remember if it's in the first game, but I know the later ones will have weird mini games, which usually mean more of these button hitting with your drone or something similar. Or there's other like mini games where it's like collect 8 seashells or something like that. So DREDGE's gameplay, I could play for hours. I love fishing. It is one of the few games that I have been like, oh yeah, I should 100% this. Whereas playing Banban was a struggle, to say the least. However, I think outside of their gameplay, the main difference between them is how they disperse their lore. And the main draw, I think, for both of these games comes from their lore. So DREDGE's lore very slowly pulls you in. You can find notes in a bottle that like kind of explain what's going on or what has gone on. It has, as you can see, this handkerchief is special. It has a little description that tells you a bit more about it. There's dialogue with other characters, most of which is optional. There is some that like you have to do, like at the beginning you have to talk to the mayor, you have to talk to the fishmonger, who's the one who will buy your fish. But like the lighthouse woman you don't ever have to talk to, but she is very important if you want to learn more about this world. And its explicit narrative, there's not much of it, like I said before. The lore weaves itself very subtly through the little narrative it does have. However, it draws you into this story and it encourages you to explore the map you have and to doubt characters. Um, there are very specific places on the map where you're supposed to go for like mainline quests and things, but a lot comes from these little characters you can find and talk to if you look at every nook and cranny on the map. Um, friends and I have all played this game. I think when it first came out, we would sit in a Discord call for a couple hours, honestly, and just be silent and play the game. And the only time we really talked to each other was to be like, "Oh my god, did you see that thing that happens when you go to that place?" Um, Trying to stay very vague for anyone who hasn't played this game yet, because I highly recommend it. But there's just something very nice about being able to independently play this game, but still being able to talk about it with my friends and discuss the weird stuff that's going on, and what does it all mean and all that stuff. Ban on the other hand, kind of its lore kind of just drags you in kicking and screaming. You're dropped into the game with only this image on screen, which says, "For a parent looking for their missing child, time is a delicate matter. Click the clock to advance time." And if you click that clock, the only thing that really changes is this background image. So, like, the lights will go off, the chairs will move, there'll be less computers, things like that to show a passage of time. And then once you get past that, you're dropped into the game. There's not much direction. You're kind of just like, all right, time to go play the game. And there's not much narrative, much like Dredge. The sequels of this game do add some voice acting and a bit more narrative to like make you sure you know where you're going. Excuse me. But I am not sure that was to the game's benefit. In fact, one of the only things that made me keep wanting to play were these notes and environmental things that you can find. There's a lot more notes in its sequels, but even just here, finding a note from what I assume is your child, talking about where it's going with their friend Claire, finding a note on the whiteboard, seeing some very weird text from one of the, characters for children here. It was very strange. It drew me in. I wanted to know more about, why does this seemingly like painted on text so creepy if this is a place for children? What does "the end is here" mean written on a whiteboard? That means someone who either works here or has been here wrote that. And all that stuff. This is another game that a friend and I are, kind of obsessed with, even though it's not the greatest of games. There's something about it, especially in this first one, where we were like, they are so close to getting it. They are so close to fully grasping the everything that this game should be. And when the sequels came out, we would talk about, what's going on, what do we think will happen next in the next game, because by the time we found it, most of the games have been released, and the devs are pretty quick about saying when a new one is being made. And also talking about what creators will be playing it next, because sometimes listening to other creators play the game will give new context or ideas about what the hell's going on. And even though I said this game isn't super fantastic, there's something really charming about it in a strange way. And in fact, if we look at both of their Steam reviews, we can see that Dredges are like, overwhelmingly positive. They have a bunch of reviews. And while Ban has less reviews, still a significant amount for an indie game, but they are mixed, and its sequels, I'm pretty sure, don't get much better. But even with this low score, the devs are on their 4th game, so there's something about it that keeps bringing people in. And despite their wildly different scores, both games were catapulted into popularity. And in fact, even if you look at these YouTube views, Dredges, which has a lot more reviews and a lot more positive reviews, their views have, kind of less on YouTube, whereas Ban has a lot more. And both of these were kind of just, I tried to find top YouTube videos that weren't just like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye, because, you know, of course they're going to get big views, they're large YouTubers. So I tried to find like smaller-ish channels, or channels that, you know, aren't going to consistently get those large views, just to better show the disparage here. But yeah, I guess we solved the lore mystery, and I guess we're good on time, so we have a lot of time for questions, right? No, I'm joking. But just looking at a couple popular games that came out this year that just so happened to be lore first, I really wonder if they are still the, you know, if these games are the reason why it got popular. So I want to go a little further back to 2017 to look at another game, Hello Neighbor. If you're not aware of this game, it was one of those games that was, I don't want to say stuck in alpha forever, because it did release and the devs were good about their updates, but it was in alpha and beta and available to play for a very long time before the full release. Some might say too long, but that's neither here nor there. It is a game that one of its main draws was this interesting learning enemy AI that it had, where it was supposed to like learn about the player's habits and how they are trying to get into the house, and adjust for that. But the one question that drew in a lot more people and was like the main reason for playing the game, it was in a lot of the marketing and all of that, was what is in the neighbor's basement. So the main gameplay of this was to get into the neighbor's house and get into his basement. The main way the player can do this is by solving puzzles and using stealth. So this image here on the right is one of the puzzles. There is a painting or a photo in one of the rooms of the house that had objects in a specific way, and then you as the player would have to recreate this image in the actual room, which would unlock something. I'm not sure what this one gave you, but normally it's like a key card, you know, some object that you'll need later, something like that. And then the other one is stealth, which on the GIF on the left, you can see whoever playing here got caught by the neighbor while they're stealthing through the house. And you can see in this image, instead of the neighbor beelining for you like most, you know, stealth games enemies would, he goes around and tries to cut you off. This is, I think, an attempt to show off the neighbor's AI, where it's a bit smarter and a bit more interesting than normal enemy AI in games like this. The neighbor AI, like I said, also learns a bit from you. So for example, if you try to get into his house through breaking a window, the next time you try to go through that same window, it'll be boarded up. So instead of just, you know, throwing something through it, you'll need to go find a crowbar or something similar to peel off the boards and then break the window to get in. This type of gameplay makes it a lot harder for each time you get caught, which makes each playthrough feel very important. So while that gameplay is extremely interesting, like I said, a large part of what people were interested in was what was in the basement, the story, this mystery of the game. And the lore of Hello Neighbor tends to use the environment a lot to disperse this lore. It also has a few cutscenes where you can, you know, pick and grab stuff and dissect, but I think most of it is through the environment. So if you see in the bottom right-hand corner, that is the neighbor's house, and it looks a bit strange. The more you play and the further you get through the game, you actually see his house get bigger and crazier, and I think there's either a train or a roller coaster, I forget which, that is kind of like slowly built that goes through the house. And then the rooms in the house also become a bit more strange. This one above the house is a flooded room, and I don't know if you can really see it, but right here there is a shark in there, so you can't just swim in there because it'll get you, so you have to do something about the shark. This room down here in the bottom left is upside down. I did not post that upside down. That's how the room looks. which both of those are very strange to find in a house, a normal house that you would see. But this one up here in the top left is kind of just a normal child's bedroom. The thing that makes this strange is the context of the opening cutscene, which shows the neighbor like shoving a kid into his basement and then locking the door. So this one is, rather than just being strange to show that the neighbor is strange, this one is directly related to the basement mystery. The way this game delivers its lore is in a way that encourages the exploration of this house, and it doesn't ever fully explain everything. Everything you find is a new discussion point, and it really felt like this game was built to make players ask questions and figure things out. And this same philosophy has followed the devs into their later games. So Hello Guest was a game that players could only play through solving an ARG. Eventually it was released to Steam, so you could just play it, but at the beginning you could only play it if you found the password and everything and solved this ARG. And the ARG took place in one of their different games, which was a hide-and-seek, Among Us-esque Hello Neighbor themed game. And then the Hello Guest game was actually a teaser for their full sequel of Hello Neighbor 2. And, this approach worked out super well for them, especially when you look a bit deeper into the gameplay of Hello Neighbor and its sequel, where the advanced AI that they advertise is not as advanced as we were promised. It's still pretty good, but I don't know if it's just bugs or if they were unable to fully deliver it, but it is not what it was in early alphas, if that makes sense. But even with this gameplay hiccup, they were still able to keep a positive rating and keep people talking about it, due to how intriguing the lore and the story are. I know people love to solve ARGs, but I feel like if it's from people who have burned you before, you're less likely to be interested in it. So the fact that their community was able to solve this ARG like pretty quickly, honestly, to just find Hello Guest and then to find out that it was a sequel to Hello Neighbor is very, very promising for them. And, I could probably go on and on and on about all the games that use lore and how those games pull people in. Both older games and newer games, we could probably go year by year and find, oh, this is the one that can like fully answer the what is it about lore question that I posed earlier. However, there is one game that I want to talk about still before we reach the end of this talk. And that game, to a few people's grief, I'm sure, is the Five Nights at Freddy's game. This game and its series has kind of gone off the rails, but being someone who, consumes a lot of indie horror, especially in 2014 when this game first dropped, I was amazed at this game, and the way that it progressed with its future sequels, I think, really changed the indie horror scene in the same way that Slender did a few years back. After FNAF blew up, even outside of, the endless amount of fan games, I feel like more indie horror tried this lore-first approach with its, tighter gameplay loop and simplified, or lack thereof, gameplay. So I want to look at the first 4 games. I know there's a million of them now, but I think these first 4 had something that the future sequels kind of lost. And they had a very large impact because they all came out very close to each other. So the first 2 came out in 2014, and then the later 2 came out in 2015, but like very soon after the first ones. where it felt like we were getting a FNAF game like every few months, basically. And for those who don't know anything about Five Nights at Freddy's, basically the overall idea of the series is that it's a game about children who were abducted and murdered and had their bodies stuffed in animatronic suits. And that is probably the easiest way I can explain it. Okay. So all four of these games had a lore-first approach and have a very single tight gameplay loop. The main gameplay, which we can kind of see in these two GIFs, was looking at cameras, making sure the animatronics aren't near you, and then using lights or doors to keep them out. Please. So this is FNAF 2. We can see the same thing. The main difference is rather than having doors, you have to use lights and you have a mask to put on. And then the biggest departure was FNAF 3, which used audio lures to keep the animatronic away from you. And then FNAF 4 after that, which had 0 cameras, and the only way to keep the animatronics away from you was to listen for them. So you'd run up to a door, listen for breathing. If you hear it, you close it. If you didn't, you would flash your flashlight. So in this top screenshot, you can see, if you flash your flashlight, you can see the animatronic at the end, and then it will leave, basically, because you caught it. And all 4 of these games take advantage of these very simple gameplay to shove as much lore as physically possible into these games. So these games disperse lore in 3 major ways, I believe, which is using the background/environmental elements, the minigame/cutscenes within the games, and then using the phone guy and the animatronics in there. Not every game uses all 3, but I believe they use at least 2. So the background elements in FNAF are usually random events, but they can occur by trigger. Some of them, we don't know what the triggers are yet, but a lot of them are just, pure randomness, a very small % chance of them happening. But all of these events, no matter how small, are very important to the overall lore of the game. So these are screenshots from FNAF 1. The top one that's moving is a Golden Freddy event, which I don't think had a trigger. I'm pretty sure that one was just random. But then the bigger one here to the right replaces a rules, like how to behave in the pizzeria, to being notes from local newspapers about the missing children, which is a main plot point to all of these games. This bottom one is also, you see Freddy pulling off his head to reveal that something else is inside. FNAF 2s are a little less clear. You can see animatronics here that are in places that they shouldn't be. These 2 are random events of animatronics that can't attack you. The puppet up here is one that you should basically... It feels wrong to see because the puppet is an animatronic that could kill you. So usually if you don't do the thing to keep it out, it just immediately gets you. So the fact that you can see it outside of its designated area is very strange. And then this one down here is just a random thing that can show up, which is to see a eyeless version of various animatronics. 3 is very similar. It has the same, random stuff changing in the background, but the biggest one is you can get a screen that shows Springtrap, which is this bunny animatronic that is the only one trying to get you, has a human corpse stuck inside of it, which we will talk about a bit later. And then, there's posters changing and secret characters that can be seen also, but this is the biggest one. And then in 4, I only put up one image because it's kind of hard to see, but if you look over here to the left of the bed, you can see a vase of flowers. So normally, there's nothing there, but there are 3 different things that could be, which is these flowers, pill bottles, or an IV drip. This is the biggest environmental thing in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and it has a very, very small chance of happening. But once the community found out about this, it was a very large piece of lore that helped tie everything together. Moving on to the mini games, these were introduced in games 2 and on, and they give a lot to the story of these games. Usually they appear on death, sometimes they appear just after you've successfully completed a night. I think later on the developer made it so that way you can just kind of trigger these whenever, so that way it's less difficult to be able to play these. But these ones, this is from 2, and as you can see, I call it a minigame, but all you're really doing is walking around. A lot of them are called minigames, but they're glorified, interactable cutscenes. So they're less additions to gameplay and more just another vessel for lore. You kind of just walk around until you either walk over a trigger or enough time has passed where something happens. However, in FNAF 3, which we'll talk about a little later, they do have more minigames. But yeah, in these ones, you can see it's just giving children cake on the right, and then on the left, it's called the Give Life minigame, which shows the puppet character going to dead children and giving them one of the masks from the main 4 animatronics. And on the right, you can also just barely see a car comes into screen a little bit at the end. If this GIF played the whole thing, you would see the car come up to the crying child, get out, the child would die, and then the car would take the child and drive away. This was also the introduction to the crying child, who makes a lot more appearances later in the games. So this is 3. So it has some of those just walk around minigame things, which you can see in the top left and bottom left. And it also introduces Purple Guy. I'm going to play this little video real quick. This is a bit of an example of the more gameplay minigames that the games can have. There's a bunch of other ones, but this was the best example I could find. These games feel like nothing. As you can see, once you collect all the balloons, you can just go to the exit, but if you look at the top, it shows that there's still one more to get. So if you looked around that minigame a little more before going to the exit, you would find that there's a place where you can exit out of bounds, and once you do that, you can find more lore to dissect. And then these 2 minigames, like I said, introduce Purple Guy, who is a big character for the series and is the main antagonist, and it explains a lot, especially this yellow suit here, which is the Springtrap suit. And again, if this GIF played the full thing, you'd see him get in, and then the suit's springs snap, and it ends up killing Purple Guy. And you could also see the crying child again down here. Oops. Please go to the next one, thank you. And then this is 4. These minigames are more of just cutscenes, and this makes sense. FNAF 4, I'm pretty sure, was originally meant to be the finale of this entire series. We weren't meant to get more games after these 4. So these are just cutscenes. They kind of tell you what's going on, and it gives almost a closure to the series. And now I know some of you may be thinking, well, if these are just cutscenes and they tell us what's going on, that's narrative, that's not lore, what are we doing here? So while you are partially correct, there's a lot to dissect from these cutscenes. One, in this top one, you can see this little golden Freddy bear, who is the one who's talking to you, appears in almost every screen of these little cutscenes. And then in this smaller one, this one on the other side, you can see the golden Springtrap suit again, and then the golden Freddy suit, which is a bigger version of this tiny one. So even though that these, oh, and then also that the character we play as is the crying child, or one of them. So even though that these cutscenes kind of tell us a lot about what's going on, there's still a lot to dissect, a lot of small things that from playing the other 3 games, you're like, ooh, that's very important. Um, and then finally, the last piece of main lore is through Phone Guy and the animatronics themselves. So on screen right now are the 4 different versions of the Freddy mascot character from each game. So this is 1, and then 2, 3, 4. And the reason why I think the animatronics themselves are an important piece of lore is because their designs change so drastically across games, more so than just, the developer updating the game's graphics for a sequel. And then Phone Guy is important because he is basically a voice that in the first 3 games tells you, how to play, gives a little bit more context to the world. Nothing super crazy. Sometimes he drops a little bit of hints about stuff, not really about the overall lore, but just being like, oh yeah, we can't let the kids get too close to the animatronics anymore after that one bite in 87, which made everyone go crazy. But I think outside of his dialogue, Phone Guy's presence is probably the most important thing, especially since he appears in games 1, 2, and 3. However, in game 1, he dies. We hear it on one of the recordings that he leaves for us on night 4 or 5. So, but then he appears again, alive and well, in game 2, which that in itself is a huge piece of lore. If 2 is meant to be a sequel, why is he here? He's alive again. Is this a mistake on the devs' part? Did they only have one voice actor? And while that may seem like the case, if you look a bit deeper into 2, you can see the suit from 1 in game 2. So that just adds another layer to it. If the second game's animatronics look newer, but Phone Guy is alive, and also we can see the suit from the first game, does that still make this game a sequel? A sequel? Excuse me. And excuse me, I had to cough again. And like I said, all 4 of these games interact with each other. They all tell us the story of Five Nights at Freddy's without outright telling us anything about the story of Five Nights at Freddy's. They give us these little things to grasp onto, mini games to dissect, environmental changes to look out for. So many things for the players to find to fully understand this story. And these games brought together a very large community that is still active today. People are still theorizing about these games, and they are still making fan games and the like. And it has been almost 9 years since the original game's release. So back to my original question. What is it about lore? Originally, when I was making this talk, I wanted to leave this very open-ended and for the audience to decide that for themselves. And while I still think y'all should totally do that, I think I found my own answer, which is community. And now I know people are thinking every game has community. That's just how being a fan of something is. However, I feel like there's something a bit different about this horror and lore community. I've been playing games for a very long time since I was a child, but I always felt like a bit of an outsider, even if I was playing the popular games that everyone else was, or the same games that my friends were. It was not really until I found these games that I felt like I was a part of something. Lore in these games allows for players to interact with each other in a new way, allowing them to theorize and ask questions of the games. And these questions are the ones that the games are posing themselves. The games want their players to poke holes. They want their players to look through game files to find those small hidden things. And I think this simplified gameplay or lack of gameplay we often see is to get more people to play these games. So to quickly go to a non-gameplay example, have y'all ever worked on a group project? One where you don't really know your teammates, but you still really want to get that good grade. So now imagine that group project, but everyone is on the same page as you. Everyone is able to give input and to help, and some might even bring new ideas that you didn't even think about that allowed you to get this higher grade. Um, that same feeling, I think, is about people who feel. That same feeling is how I think people feel about being part of these game communities or lore communities. Um, it's a group project where everyone who wants to get that good where everyone wants to get that good ending, and we all want that A plus in gaming. To use a more gameplay example, I really love the game Returnal, but I have yet to finish it, and I'm not sure I ever will. It's a time loop third-person shooter where our protagonist is stuck on an alien planet. The gameplay is very fun and very rewarding. It grows with you as you play. You can gain different power-ups and rewards that can persist with you through loops. It's really great, but it's also very hard. I love the game, and I want the lore. I want more of the lore and the narrative that is there. I want to know more. I loved playing it, and it made me want to keep playing. But I have yet to make it past the second world after putting in so many hours. I know I could just look up a walkthrough, or watch a playthrough, or look up what's going on. But when it comes to learning about the game's lore, sometimes it just doesn't hit as hard, if you're not the one doing the digging. Um, Going back to the group project, does an A feel just as good? Getting an A on the project feel just as good when you're only riding on the coattails of your partners? So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'm in the Discord probably, so feel free to @me there, or if you'd rather, I'm on Twitter. Feel free to just send me a DM. They should be open. Thank you so much for listening, and yeah.